The first time I saw her marching toward my barn, heels digging into the gravel like she was storming the beaches of Normandy, I knew she was trouble. Her name was Brenda Whitmore, the newly elected president of the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association. 60-something, hair bleached within an inch of its life, and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled since Clinton was in office. She came with a clipboard, the universal sign of someone looking to ruin your day. "Mr. Vale Rowan, we need to talk," she said, eyeing the string lights I had just finished rehanging across the beams of my wedding barn. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a commercial circus." I leaned against the fence post and crossed my arms. "It's a working farm, Brenda. Been in my family for 3 generations, and weddings help keep it running," she sniffed. "I don't care if Abraham Lincoln built that barn himself. We've had complaints, noise, traffic, litter. The HOA has rules and you're violating them." I narrowed my eyes. "I've got a county-issued event venue license. All legal, all approved." She waved her clipboard like it was a sword. "The HOA supersedes that. We will be issuing fines daily until you cease all events on this property." Now, I'm not a man who loses his cool easily. I've spent the last 20 years rebuilding this place after my father passed. I run it with my daughter, Gwen, 28 and tougher than barbed wire. Brenda had no clue who she was messing with. The next morning, I woke up to a citation duct taped to my mailbox. "Unauthorized commercial activity, $500 fine." By the end of the week, there were 5 more, all signed by Brenda. Gwen stormed into the house with the latest one in hand. "She put this on the back of my car windshield," she said, "while I was unloading centerpieces." "That's trespassing." I picked up the phone and called the county clerk's office. 35 minutes later, I had my answer. "Mr. Rowan, your license is valid. You're fully within your rights to host events." That was all I needed to hear. I printed out 3 copies of the email they sent me. One for Brenda, one for the HOA board, and one for the bulletin board outside the barn right next to the wedding schedule for the next 2 months. That Saturday, during a sunset ceremony under the willow tree, Brenda showed up again. This time with 2 other HOA board members trailing behind her like nervous puppies. She didn't even wait for the "I do." "You are ordered to shut this down immediately," she snapped, her finger jabbing toward the guests. "This is an illegal gathering." I walked up to her and handed her the paper. "Read it, county says otherwise." She snatched it and scanned the page, her face fell. The 2 board members behind her exchanged uncomfortable glances. "This doesn't matter," Brenda hissed. "The HOA has authority here." "No, Brenda," I said calmly. "The county trumps your clipboard." She didn't answer, just turned on her heel and stomped off the property again, nearly tripping on a sprinkler head. That was the last I saw of her that month, but the war was just getting started. The following week, I noticed a beige SUV parked halfway down the gravel drive near the hayfield, engine off, windows cracked, someone sitting inside with binoculars. I didn't need to squint to know who it was. Brenda had traded her clipboard for surveillance gear. I walked down the drive with a bucket of feed in one hand, didn't even glance at her until I was 5 feet from her window. "If you're bird watching, you're on the wrong property," I said. "We've got more cows than cardinals." She didn't roll the window down. Just glared over the top of the lenses like I was the one trespassing. "Documenting," she said. "We'll be reviewing footage at the next board meeting. You planning to show wedding guests kissing under that willow tree? Might need a lawyer for that." Her jaw tightened, and she drove off without another word. By Thursday, I caught wind of what she was really up to. Gwen's friend Nathan, whose cousin happened to work at the local planning office, pulled me aside while we were setting up a bar for a Friday reception. "She filed a petition," he said. "Tried to get your zoning changed from mixed use to strict residential, quietly, slipped it in under a stack of noise complaints she filed all at once." I blinked. "She tried to rezone my land behind my back," he nodded. "Would have gone through if the clerk hadn't remembered your name, saw the venue license and flagged it." I didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at the string lights Gwen was stapling to the crossbeam. If Brenda was willing to manipulate zoning applications, this wasn't about noise or traffic. It was about power. I drove straight to the courthouse first thing the next morning and requested a full copy of the HOA's filings. Took them 3 hours to pull everything. Turned out Brenda had submitted not just zoning requests, but also a proposal to restrict non-domestic gatherings within the neighborhood. The language was vague enough to include birthday parties, barbecues, even graduation celebrations, basically anything louder than a whisper. I brought the files to my neighbor, Jim Carlisle, a retired land use attorney who now spent most of his time restoring his 1966 Mustang and drinking too much iced tea. He flipped through the documents, eyebrows rising higher with each page. "This is a mess," he muttered. "She's trying to sneak in blanket policy changes without a full board vote. She forged 2 sets of initials here. That's a felony. She forged board members' initials, 100%. And this one, look here, this is a signature from someone who moved out last year. She's using dead names to push this through." I sat back in the porch chair, stunned. "What do we do?" He looked up slowly. "We go to the sheriff." That afternoon, Deputy Langley showed up with a citation book and a barely suppressed grin. "You got yourself a real live wire in that HOA," he said. "We're opening a case." Langley took statements from Jim and me, then followed up with the planning office clerk. 2 days later, Brenda was served a notice at her front door in full view of the neighborhood. Gwen caught it on her phone from across the street. The video made the rounds faster than lightning in a dry field. By Tuesday, rumors were swirling. The HOA meeting that night was packed. I showed up early, not to stir the pot, but because I wanted to see how far this would go. Brenda walked in 10 minutes late, flanked by her usual bored lackeys. She carried a manila folder and a forced grin. The room went quiet. "I'd like to begin with a brief statement," she said, standing at the front. "There have been some misunderstandings regarding recent administrative filings." "Misunderstandings don't involve forged documents," said a voice from the back. It was Helen Grady, who'd lived on the east side of the neighborhood for 30 years and never raised her voice once. Until now. Brenda's nostrils flared. "I assure you, all actions taken were in the best interest of Maple Hollow," Helen stood. "You lied. You tried to change zoning without a vote. You used a dead woman's name. You forged initials." Several neighbors gasped. Gwen, standing beside me with her arms crossed, didn't say a word, but her eyes were locked on Brenda like a hawk. Brenda's voice wobbled. "This meeting is not the forum for it's exactly the forum," I said, stepping forward. "You've been trying to shut down a legitimate business. You've broken the law to do it. And now the sheriff's department is investigating you for forgery and misuse of authority." She dropped the folder. Papers scattered across the floor. No one moved to help her pick them up. One of the board members stood slowly. A guy named Darren, who always nodded too much and had a voice like a leaf blower. "I wasn't told about any zoning changes," he said. "I never signed anything." Another board member, Melissa, spoke next. "She told me we were just filing noise complaints. Said the rest was just routine." Brenda turned on her heel and walked out, face flushed, shoulders stiff. The door slammed behind her. That night, the board held an emergency vote. Brenda was suspended pending investigation. Darren was named temporary chair, and Helen was unanimously approved as the new secretary. The crowd applauded. I didn't, not yet. The next morning, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up my drive. Deputy Langley stepped out, this time with a folder in his hand. "She's being charged with 2 counts of forgery," he said. "And the DA's looking into whether she misused HOA funds to pay the filing fees." I raised an eyebrow. "She used HOA money for that? Looks like it. We've got receipts." "And a reimbursement request filed under community improvements." I let out a low whistle. "That's bold," Langley laughed. "Bold's one word for it, stupid's another." A week later, a letter arrived from the county. Not only was my venue license reaffirmed, but the commissioner himself sent a signed commendation letter, noting the farm's contribution to local tourism and small business growth. I framed it and hung it above the barn's entrance. By the time our next wedding rolled around, word had spread. Guests asked to take selfies under the now famous willow tree. One couple even requested a photo with Gwen and me, calling us the folks who beat the HOA mafia. I didn't correct them. We kept running weddings every weekend, and attendance only grew. Locals started booking the barn for reunions, fundraisers, even a community theater night. The same neighbors who once stayed quiet during Brenda's reign were now pitching in, helping hang lights, trim shrubs, and set up chairs. The farm wasn't just surviving. It was thriving, and Brenda. Well, last I heard, she sold her house and moved 2 towns over. Somewhere with a stricter HOA, they still probably don't know what's coming. 2 weeks after Brenda disappeared from Maple Hollow like a bad storm finally blown out to sea, I thought things might settle. But like any good rot, the decay had spread deeper than I realized. It started with a letter, not from the HOA this time, but from a law firm out of Bellevue, Mitchell and Green. The envelope was thick, heavy. Gwen brought it in while I was fixing a leak in the tack room. She dropped it on the kitchen table. Looks official, real official. They even embossed the return address. I opened it with my pocket knife, careful not to tear anything inside. The letterhead was crisp, the language stiffer than overbaked cornbread. Dear Mr. Rowan, it began, we represent several residents of the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association who have expressed concerns regarding the use of your property for large-scale events. My eyes narrowed. The letter claimed my venue had created a pattern of community disruption and emotional distress, citing ongoing disturbances that threaten residential harmony. What the hell is emotional distress supposed to mean? Gwen asked, reading over my shoulder. I picked up the second page. They're threatening a class action lawsuit, claiming I've violated the spirit of the HOA charter. No mention of the county license, no mention of Brenda. They're hoping we'll panic, Gwen said. Looks like someone's trying to keep her ghost alive. I folded the letter and set it down. It didn't smell like a real lawsuit. It smelled like intimidation. Before I could respond, the phone rang. Caller ID showed private number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Rowan, this is Charles Green, the voice said, smooth, practiced. I'd like to resolve this matter amicably before additional action is necessary. You're threatening to sue me on behalf of people who haven't even spoken to me, I said. That doesn't sound amicable. There's a precedent for nuisance-based claims when commercial activity encroaches on residential expectations, he said. Our clients would prefer not to escalate, but they are prepared to do so. I hung up without another word. That night, I called Jim Carlisle again. He showed up the next morning with a manila folder and a thermos of what he called real coffee, not that dishwater you serve. Mitchell and Green have a reputation, he said, flipping open the folder. They specialize in nuisance litigation. But they don't usually win unless they've got a strong paper trail. They don't, I said. Unless they're using forged complaints like Brenda did, Jim nodded. Then we check. Start with the names listed in the letter. Over the next 3 days, Gwen and I visited each of the 6 names mentioned as concerned residents in the document. 2 had no idea they were listed at all. 1 was a snowbird who hadn't been in town since March. Another, a soft-spoken woman named Ruby, told us she'd signed a petition Brenda brought around but hadn't agreed to legal action. She just said it was about traffic safety, Ruby said. I never agreed to anything more. We took statements from all of them, handwritten, signed, and dated. Then came the surprise. At house number 5, a middle-aged man named Greg opened the door. He was holding a tablet and looked like he'd been waiting for someone to knock. You're Rowan? He asked. That's right. He nodded toward the porch. You better come in. I've got something you'll want to see. Inside, he pulled up a video on his tablet. The image showed Brenda sitting on a patio chair in broad daylight, speaking to a group of 4 people, including Greg. She was holding a large binder. So if we bundle the complaints and get Green's firm to draft the letter, we can pressure him to sell the venue rights or shut it down completely, she said on the recording. He won't want the legal expense. Most farmers fold after the first letter. I've seen it work before, someone off camera asked. What if he doesn't fold? He will, she said. If not, we can escalate. Green knows how to bury people in paperwork. We'll make it too expensive for him to keep fighting. Greg paused the video. I didn't like her tone. So I started recording. My wife said we should stay out of it, but when I saw that letter you got, I figured you needed this. I stared at the screen for a long minute. You just handed me a loaded gun, Greg, he nodded. Just don't point it at me. I gave the video to Jim, who immediately forwarded it to the sheriff's office and the district attorney. The next day, I got a call from Assistant DA Monroe. We're reopening the investigation, she said. If she coordinated with legal counsel to misrepresent resident intent, that's civil conspiracy. Possibly criminal, depending how far it went. And Green. If he knew the complaints were fabricated, he's in just as deep. 2 deputies visited Mitchell and Green's office that afternoon. They walked out with 2 computers and a box of files. Word spread fast. By the weekend, the law firm had withdrawn the letter, claiming new information had surfaced regarding the validity of client authorization. I didn't celebrate, not yet. Instead, I invited every neighbor who'd been named in the letter to the barn. Gwen cooked up a spread smoked ribs, cornbread, and her famous peach slaw. I stood up on the flatbed trailer that doubled as our outdoor stage and held the letter up in the air. This, I said, was meant to scare us. To turn neighbors against each other, but it failed because people here still talk to each other, still look each other in the eye. The crowd applauded. Ruby raised her paper plate and shouted, "To real neighbors." That night, Greg approached me again, this time with his wife, Marion. She told us if we didn't sign the petition, we'd lose access to HOA maintenance funds, she said. Said we'd be labeled non-compliant. Jim overheard and frowned. Extortion under color of authority, that's going to look real good in court. The next day, I received a call from the DA's office. Brenda was being formally charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false legal documents, and coercion. Green's firm was being investigated by the state bar for ethical violations, but the fallout wasn't just legal. The HOA board, now under Darren's temporary leadership, held a special election. Helen was voted in as the new president. She ran uncontested. At the first meeting under her leadership, she introduced a motion to permanently exempt agricultural properties from any HOA restrictions relating to non-residential gatherings. It passed unanimously. I didn't attend that meeting. Gwen and I were too busy power washing the barn deck for a summer wedding booked months ago, but Helen stopped by afterward to drop off a certificate. Maple Hollow Community Recognition Award, it read. For contributions to local culture, commerce, and neighborly resilience. She handed it to Gwen. You two didn't just win, you changed things. I didn't say anything. Just nodded and went back to scrubbing the cedar boards. There was work to be done, and that's what we did best. Later that week, I got a letter from a couple who had attended one of our weddings. They wanted to book the barn for a charity fundraiser. Said they'd heard about us through a podcast covering small-town justice stories. Apparently, Brenda's antics had gone viral. I read the letter twice, then looked out across the field. The willow tree swayed gently in the breeze, and for the first time in a while the place felt quiet in the right way, not silenced. Settled. The barn lights clicked on as dusk fell, casting long shadows across the gravel drive. Gwen walked out, wiping her hands on her jeans. Another wedding tomorrow, she said. You ready? I looked at her, then out at the land my family had held onto through droughts, floods, and now legal warfare. Always. The barn was quiet by midweek, the scent of lemon oil still hanging in the beams after Gwen's deep clean. A new bride had dropped off 3 dozen mason jars and a box of eucalyptus garlands, and I was sorting through them on the workbench when Jim pulled into the gravel lot with a look I hadn't seen since he'd caught a trespasser trying to siphon gas from his Mustang. "Federal envelope came to my house by mistake," he said, waving a thick cream-colored packet as he stepped out of his truck. "Postman said it was misdelivered. Had your name on it." I took it from him, my name typed clean across the front, return address from the State Attorney General's office. Inside was a formal notice that Brenda's conspiracy case had escalated to a multi-agency investigation. Apparently, while combing her HOA records, auditors had discovered misappropriated funds not just from Maple Hollow, but from 3 other HOA communities where she had previously served on management committees. The total, over $78,000 in unauthorized reimbursements, fraudulent vendor payments, and redirected maintenance fees. "She's been hopping HOAs for years," Jim said, folding his arms. "And no one put the pieces together until now." I leaned against the barn post, letting that sink in. Brenda hadn't just been a power-hungry busybody with a clipboard. She'd been running a slow, deliberate grift across neighborhoods too polite or too disorganized to call her out. 2 days later, Gwen received a call from the local ABC affiliate. A reporter named Simone wanted to interview us for a story they were airing on HOA fraud and community resilience. We agreed, on the condition that no wedding clients would be filmed. Simone arrived with a cameraman and a binder so thick it could have doubled as a doorstop. She laid it on the porch table inside where printed emails, payment records, and witness statements from residents across the county who had dealt with Brenda in the past. One HOA had even submitted a formal complaint to the state board a year prior, but it had been quietly shelved due to insufficient documentation. "She always worked through technicalities, never in broad daylight," Simone said, adjusting her mic. "But the video Greg gave you that changed everything." The story aired the following week. It opened with a panoramic shot of the barn at golden hour, the willow tree casting dappled shadows across the grass. Then it cut to Brenda's mugshot taken just days prior after a sealed indictment was unsealed by the district court. 7 charges, 2 counts of fraud, 3 counts of embezzlement, 1 count of witness intimidation, and 1 count of conspiracy to falsify legal documents. The state prosecutor went on record during the segment. This individual exploited her position of authority in multiple residential associations to manipulate, intimidate, and financially harm homeowners under the guise of neighborhood order. "It's a textbook abuse of trust." The community buzzed louder than a June cicada swarm. 3 days after the report aired, Maple Hollow held its largest open meeting in recorded history. Folding chairs stretched across the community center lawn, and a full quorum of residents over 150 showed up. Gwen and I sat near the back, unnoticed at first, until Helen tapped the mic. "Before we begin the agenda," she said, "there are 2 people in this neighborhood who stood up when the rest of us weren't sure what to believe. They protected their home, their livelihood, and in doing so they protected all of us." She gestured toward us. The crowd turned. A few people stood. Then more. Before I could blink, they were applauding. I stood reluctantly, tipping my hat and giving a nod. Gwen smiled and gave a small wave. Nothing needed to be said. They knew. After the meeting, Helen pulled us aside. "There's something else," she said, handing me a letter signed by the board. "We've voted to reallocate all remaining discretionary funds toward legal reform. We're hiring an independent compliance officer and rewriting the charter to prevent any future abuse of power." "Good," I said. "That's the right move." She hesitated, then added, "We'd also like your help drafting those changes. You know the loopholes better than anyone now." I looked to Gwen. She gave a half nod, arms folded but eyes thoughtful. "I'll consider it," I said. A week later, Brenda's trial date was set. State prosecutors moved quickly, citing overwhelming evidence and community interest. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but when the court reviewed the combined testimony from 4 different HOA communities, the judge denied leniency. During the trial, Gwen and I were called as witnesses. We testified about the fraudulent legal threats, the manipulated signatures, and the orchestrated effort to bankrupt a lawful business. Greg's video was played in full, and the courtroom watched in silence as Brenda's voice laid it all out: her strategy, her contempt, her confidence in never being caught. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Brenda was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with mandatory restitution to every HOA she'd defrauded. The judge added an additional clause. She was permanently barred from serving on any residential board, committee, or leadership position for life. The courtroom emptied slowly. Outside, a few former board members lingered, unsure whether to approach us. Eventually, Darren walked over. "I didn't know how deep it went," he said quietly. I should have asked more questions." Gwen shook his hand. "Then ask them now." From here on out, spring rolled in with sudden heat and long evenings. The farm's bookings doubled. Couples who'd heard about the story began requesting themed weddings, justice of the peace style. Even a few wearing "Not Today" Brenda pins that someone from the neighborhood had made as a gag and started selling online. I never wore one, but I appreciated the humor. The barn got a new roof, courtesy of a grant from the county's Small Business Initiative. They said we'd become an example of civic resilience through lawful enterprise. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I smiled and thanked them. One afternoon, as Gwen and I were planting a new row of lilacs along the fence line, Helen stopped by again. "Thought you'd like to see this," she said, handing over a copy of the new HOA charter draft. It was thinner, simpler, and full of plain language. No hidden provisions, no vague directives. "You did this," she said. "No," I replied. "Brenda did, we just refused to let her win." That night, the barn glowed warm against the dusk, music drifting through the slats as another wedding couple danced their first dance beneath the rafters. The community had gathered to celebrate not just a marriage, but a turning point. Gwen leaned against the post beside me, arms dusted with soil, a glass of sweet tea in her hand. "Think it's over?" she asked. I watched the couples laughing, the kids chasing each other through the grass, the neighbors clustered near the fire pit finally at ease. "Yeah," I said. "I think we've finally turned the last page," and we had. Not because the fight was easy, but because we never let them write the ending.